First of all, I just want to welcome everybody here. Thank you so much for coming this morning. This is a really tough venue. First of all, we follow Halloween, and I know the students all over campus were up half the night, if not longer, so to have them come to a Saturday extra activity outside of their classes to hear about a subject that is not only controversial, but what the majority believe is rather ridiculous, it's a big, tall order. But as folks, most of us, all of the speakers I believe, did not come from any sort of fundamentalist, Bible-beating Christian background. We've really come to an understanding based on a lot of evidence that there has to be something behind the design and intricacy of life on this planet and the universe. And that's the kind of stuff you're going to hear about. In the opening talk, I'll get a little bit more into that, but I really want to welcome you and thank you for being here. Second, I want to acknowledge MSU, because they could have found some way to shut down this conference. And some of the students that are, I don't know if you know, but there was quite a controversy in the week leading up to this. But they didn't. They made a public acknowledgement that this university is a place for the open exchange of ideas. That is incredibly admirable, and I salute MSU University for making that stand and opening up this university. Now, they're not sponsoring this event, but they didn't shut it down, and they could have. So I thank them, the leadership of this campus, for making that stand for the freedom of speech and open exchange of ideas. Third, I want to thank Christian Challenge. There's about a dozen Christian groups on campus, and as a group of us, and there's about 25 different folks, almost exclusively from scientific backgrounds, who are out teaching and speaking. We go to universities, we go to schools, we go to Christian schools, we go to churches, basically anybody that'll have us. And I kind of lay out what is the evidence for creation. And by the way, I never call this subject creationism versus evolutionism, although both really are a philosophical viewpoint of how to interpret the world around us. It's really, where does the evidence fit? What viewpoint is the truth? And that's hopefully what you're here to discuss. But it was a small Christian group by the name of Christian Challenge that welcomed us in. They said, students need to hear this. And they were part of bringing this conference to your campus. And I salute them and their leadership for that. And thank you, Larry Woods. And last, just because it always comes up, the bathrooms for visitors, there's two big auditoriums. We'll be using both of them today. Down the stair steps is where you'll find the bathrooms, right down on the next level. All right. Second point, because this issue is very, very controversial, it often can become belligerent, and to the shame of both sides, both viewpoints, both philosophical worldviews. Now, honestly, the viewpoint that natural processes produced us, the viewpoint that evolution is an absolute fact that carried bacteria all the way to humanity, single-celled organisms to us, is essentially the only viewpoint that is taught all over campus in all the classes and in the rooms. Now, there's a few exceptions, but in general, that's the permeated worldview. And that is, in essence, probably why this auditorium isn't full, because it has been so successful taking over the viewpoint of the campus at large. So, as you bring questions, this is not the forum to monopolize, to take over, to prevent other people from even hearing an alternative viewpoint. This forum is to allow people to hear the alternative. Now, you can absolutely challenge anything that's said, but do it as a question, not as a platform to promote the alternative viewpoint, the alternative worldview. So we're going to limit questions to about 30 seconds. If someone is here purely to disrupt, we're going to ask them to leave, because that would be preventing other people to hear what they're here to hear. So I'm just going to ask everybody for common courtesy as we continue to present the evidence for creation, for a designer, for something behind it all. Got a checklist because I don't want to forget anything. Part of this event, each of you are being given a book. It's called Censored Science. It's laid out, the first third's about biology, the middle third's about geology, the last third's about time, space, matter, radiometric dating, radiocarbon dating, physics, cosmology. Now, I spent about 2 years. I spent 30 years at Dow Chemical. My degree is chemical engineering. I'm a research leader. I understand science very well. Producing this book, and it's a gift from others to you, because there's no way in 2 hours we're going to be able to cover all your questions, all your objections to what we're talking about, but this book does a fairly good job, it's well referenced, of giving you additional information. So please accept that gift, and we hope you enjoy it. The iPad that is part of hopefully intriguing people to this event, it will be given away at the end of the very last session. Now, every breakout lecture that you go to, you will get a ticket. Fill out the stub with your name, we'll throw it in the box. So if you're at this session, the 2 lectures, the panel discussion where any question can be asked. Nothing is off limits, but phrase it as a question, not a platform to promote your worldview. If you have data that you think contradicts what's being said, bring that up in your question, but don't spend 5 minutes talking about it. That's one of the sessions, and then the final wrap-up session. So you'll have 5 potential chances to win an iPad. And looking at this audience, you have a really good odds of winning that $500 iPad. So in that way, you're in luck. From the perspective of the organizers, I wish this room was packed overflowing. But I suspect as we go on, and by the way, gentlemen, up at the top, you get the tickets for the free iPad, the book, the lecture, and so on. So make sure you grab those and then have a seat. And we'll get students continuing all day long. So if you know what's going on and they look clueless, fill them in. And I think that's about it for the introductory comments. Now I just want to take a couple minutes. We have 4 highly qualified, incredibly, what I believe are brilliant scientific voices for the evidence that we have a creator. One is from a couple of them are from the biological area. One is an expert in genetics. One is degree is physics and astronomy. I'd like each of them to just introduce themselves, and then in just a minute talk about what their lectures are going to be about. And then I'll explain where those are at, and then I'll give you our introductory talk, and we'll be off for the real meat of the conference. So, Dr. Jackson, you're right up front here closest, if you would.
Okay, yes.
Hang on, I want to hand the microphone to you.
I'll just talk loud until he gets here. My doctorate's in science education from University of Virginia, and so I'm not the research scientist on the team, but I do have a lot of other credentials and experience and all of that, and I think you'll hopefully benefit from my teaching talents, abilities. The first talk I'm doing is I'm going to be the guy for the Big Bang is fake, and that sounds a little provocative and all of that, but what I mean by fake is it's sold as something that it is not. And what I really want to focus on is data, facts, evidence, logic. What is hard science really qualifies as science, and then apply that to the Big Bang Theory, which certainly can be taught as a model, as a heuristic event, but not as fact, and not certainly accepted even fully by the cosmological science community. The other talk I'm doing in the afternoon is going to be natural selection is not evolution. And my primary area being in biology, that's frustrating to me because natural selection is observable, testable, and verifiable, and even falsifiable, so it completely qualifies as an established factual feature of biological science in the real world. But to say that if you don't believe in evolution, you don't believe in natural selection is 100% not true, because we can see natural selection, we can't actually see wholesale evolution like from dinosaurs into birds or from fish into amphibians. We don't see that, and natural selection examples are usually given as evolution examples, and that is not interchangeable money, folks. That's the thing that I'm going to say about that.
Okay, you're getting into your lecture as a speaker. Keep us on track. I need the microphone back. Ooh. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. But that is the point, to give you enough information so you know what are these talks about and what is going to be the most useful to me. So let me just pass this one along.
Well, thank you folks for coming up today. My name is Don DeYoung. I live down in Indiana. My training was up at Michigan Tech Engineering, and then I went over to Iowa State for grad school. I have 2 workshops today. The first one is called Discovery of Design. what we're finding is that inventors and engineers are looking to nature today for solutions to problems and new products. And I think it's a whole new paradigm of science, looking to see what the creator put there for us to find and make use of. And we'll be looking at some examples, and they are endless. The other workshop I have will be current events in astronomy. We'll look at life in space, the origin of the moon, the age of the Earth, and talk about the Big Bang Theory and anything else going on in the world of space. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Dr. DeYoung. Okay, Dr. Bergman.
Okay, my name is Dr. Jerry Bergman, and my presentation, first one's on Hitler, which I've received a lot of positive feedback, and last week I received a lot of negative feedback, which is interesting. But we have an enormous amount of data about Hitler and what he believed and why he did what he did, so we're not talking about ancient history, we're talking about data that exists in documents which are still around. And the second talk I'll be giving is evolution, and I'm an evolutionist. I believe evolution occurred, but it's going the wrong way. And there's clear evidence, there's no question whatsoever, it's going the wrong way. I teach primarily in the medical field, and we are very aware of this. It's in our medical textbooks, it's in my biochemistry textbook, and also, believe it or not, last week it was on 60 Minutes. If you haven't seen that, it's an excellent show showing what we can do with the problem that evolution is going the wrong way. And again, this is not controversial, but very important. So if you're in the medical area, that's an area that you should stop by and see what I have to say.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Sandberg.
Okay, so I'm glad to be here, and a smaller group is good because we can have more conversation. And so my training is genetics, and I've been a Cornell professor all my life. And major focus for me has been the mutation selection process. So the first half of my career, I was a strong evolutionist, and for the last 25 years, I've been a Christian. In the last 15 years, I decided that I should believe all of the Bible, not part of it, and I've become a creation-believing scientist. So my first talk will be on the very famous long-term evolution experiment here by Dr. Minsky and his colleagues. One of the things that MSU is most famous for. And I'm just going to basically say it's very good research, but the actual conclusions where it's pointing is actually away from evolution and more toward degradation. I believe all the populations will actually go to extinct due to mutation accumulation. And my afternoon talk will be about a similar product of MSU, which is the AVITA program. This is a computer program that has been set to prove evolution is true and that the mutation selection process works. And what I'm really going to show is AVITA shows when you actually use realistic settings for the computer program, it actually shows that you cannot create new information through trial and error. And in fact, you cannot stop the degradation of information except by intelligent intervention. So those are my two talks. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sandberg. Now, one more thing I forgot. The rooms are somewhat rearranged from what is on the schedule. All of you should have gotten a schedule. But there are signs right outside that clearly point to who is in what room. So don't necessarily follow the room numbers that are listed. As you go out, you'll see a marquee on a tripod pointing that direction. One of the breakout rooms is right next door. The rest of them, Dr. Sanford and Dr. DeYoung's, are all the way down the hall, and then turn right and all the way down that hall. And you'll see right at each corner there's a sign pointing to their rooms. So that's why I wanted them to introduce their lectures. Think about what you'd like to attend, and then just follow the signs to that room. And I think, with that, I'm just going to go ahead and lay some groundwork. For the next 20, 25 minutes, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork of this whole very controversial issue. And I've asked all the speakers, the breakout sessions are an hour and a half long. They may end earlier if things wrap up. But to leave between 30 and 50% of their time purely for questions, because I think that is where the real value is. I mean, anybody can come tell you anything. You don't know if it's true or not. But when you compare it with what the data shows, what science is showing, what observations are showing, and there's a conflict, it's your chance to ask about those conflicts. And hear people who have spent their life studying this issue from a different perspective than most of you, why they've come to believe what they've come to believe. And then sort it out for yourself. I would encourage you to go to the breakout sessions, sit on down front and just have a friendly conversation. I'll guarantee you, these gentlemen, and I know each of them, they have a gentle, kind spirit. They're not here to argue and fight and nitpick and insult. It's not what we're here for. It's just to have a conversation and show you why we've come to believe what we've come to believe, and then it's up to you. Nobody is here to force anything upon anybody. So, with that little bit of background, I want to just jump kind of right in to this question. We came from somewhere. We're here because something happened. Now, both sides of this controversy, they think the other side is absolutely blind to what they believe to be obvious, without a doubt. But the point is, there is truth. Something happened to produce us. Now, as I said, I've spent my whole life using and implementing experimental science, and I know very well what it can do and what it can't do. And as a just really broad overview, this isn't rocket science, what we're discussing here. You see, there are only two possibilities to explain our existence. Now, one of them is that some sort of a natural process produced the universe. Some sort of a natural process produced life. Some sort of natural process caused one form of life to turn into another form of life, that turned into another form of life, that eventually turned into people. The other alternative is that there is a creator behind it all. Now, in even more simplistic terms, if you can imagine that this box represents the entire universe, all of the stars, all the matter, all the space, all the complexity and beauty out there, and if you open up the box, it's a jewelry box, you know, it's filled with bracelets, it's filled with necklaces, it's filled with gorgeous jewels. Those could represent the incredible variety and beauty and intricacy of animal life here on Earth. Either the box made itself, and everything in the box made itself, or the box has a box maker. It's the same two possibilities. Now, there's an enormous number of denominations, including the recent pronouncements by the Pope and other religious organizations, that say, well, you know, God just used evolution to produce things. God's behind it all. Well, you're still saying evolution is true. It really happened. You're still saying matter, time, space, and energy essentially made itself. You're still saying stars produced heavier elements that produced planets. You're still saying chemicals came alive to form the first form of life. You're still saying bacteria turned into people by some natural process. It's just a subset of natural processes made us. And there would be absolutely no evidence for creation that the box is a box maker if that is true. So it's one of those two possibilities. That's it. Now, here's how science works. You see, both of those are philosophical viewpoints, all right? You can't go back in time. You can see all sorts of variety of life, and you can line it up. You can see changes in the genetic code, and you can make speculation about whether it's a useful mutation or a negative mutation or insignificant mutation. But you don't see extremely, totally different body form shapes turning into completely different body forms and shapes. You just see variation of what was there on the DNA code in general. Now, you also don't see creation. You never, in a scientific laboratory, see time, space, or space and matter or energy appearing. No experiment ever done has shown this is the case. You don't see new forms of life appearing. All the time in my scientific career, I've come to a point where I don't know if something's true or not. It either is true or it isn't true. And how can science show whether it's true or not? You see, science has been defined as only naturalistic processes. Well, that's semantics. The point is, if you're going to figure out where the geological layers came from, you've got to study the layers. If you're going to figure out where life came from, you've got to study biology. If you're going to figure out where information came from, you've got to study information. So the evidence is going to point you one direction or the other. Now, there was a science theorist named Dr. Karl Popper back in the earlier 1900s who just gave a classic example of understanding how can you figure out if science is, what is science and what isn't. And he phrased it this way. He said, all science has to start with an idea. And then you got to gather data to see whether the idea is true or not. But is this how it works? If my scientific hypothesis is all swans are white, do I prove it by going all over Michigan on my summer break off my classroom schedule, and I make thousands of documentations, and every swan I find is white? Have I scientifically used science to prove every swan on Earth is white? And the obvious answer is no. But how about if I Facebook my friends, and they Facebook their friends, and they Twitter, and there are people in Germany, and France, and Australia, and Argentina, and Alaska, and I get hundreds of millions of observations back, and every single one of those observations show every swan they've seen is white. Have I now used scientific observation to prove my viewpoint? Absolutely not. There is one way science can know what the truth is, though, and that's if you find a black swan. Now you know the truth. That's what it means by falsifiable. Now, there really are two options. Either the box has a box maker, or the box made itself. Now, by law, we have allowed in our country a system to develop where the government can't promote anything dealing with God, and the government runs the education system. So to even cast doubt upon the idea the box made itself only leaves the other alternative. The box has a box maker. So it is systematically kept out of classrooms. There are exceptions, but that's by and large exactly what's going on. Now if you take someone and you only teach them one viewpoint, generation after generation after generation, when there's two possibilities, guess what? It becomes self-promoting, self-deceiving, and it becomes the predominant viewpoint, or any other viewpoint is considered absurd by those who have been conditioned to believe that viewpoint. And I'll get back to that at the end of the lecture. Now, there's tons and tons and tons. By the way, none of us are hiding what we believe. We come to you with a very biased viewpoint. Our viewpoint is, and by the way, we didn't start out this way, we have moved this way because of the data, is that the Bible really does give an accurate model for understanding the observational scientific world around us. And there's just one verse out of the Bible I'm going to share with you, and it kind of, it's just interesting, it just jumped out at me. It's out of the book of Psalms, and it says, it starts with a typical statement of philosophy. Happy is the one whose hope is in the Lord his God. Now, if I was in a church, I'd spend the rest of the sermon on that puppy. That would preach. It's not in our wealth. It's not in our possessions. And by the way, you can observe this. You look at people in Hollywood who are married. They can't stay married by and large. They're filled with divorce. They've got all the money. They've got fame. They've got prestige. They're on drugs. There's lots of suicides. All sorts of evidence that all those things we think are going to lead to happiness more often than not don't. But this is my point. It then goes on to say, who is this thing, this entity, this box maker that calls himself God, that says over and over and over and over again throughout the Bible that we should make the Lord of our lives? Who is this? And he defines himself. He says he's the one who made heaven, the heavens, and biblically that is outer space, stars, time, space, matter. He is the one who made the earth and the sea, and he's the one that made everything in them. Now, this was written 2,500 years ago, and I find this kind of fascinating. The heavens are the astronomical physics type sciences, cosmology, physics, and so on. The earth and the sea are the earth sciences, biology, geology, paleontology, so on. And everything in them are the biological medical sciences. The three major branches of all human scientific knowledge laid out 2,500 years ago, and the one who says he made it all lists them in the same order we've characterized them all. Just kind of interesting. So, I only have about 15 minutes, so I'm just going to grab one example from each of these. Now you're going to hear lots and lots more of just fascinating stuff as you go to these other sessions. But I'm going to talk about the formation, the origin. We're talking about the origin of things, the origin of stars. Classrooms and the textbooks and the museums in like big evolution charts, stellar evolution. Kind of like we line up animals. We line up fossils to make it, to show fish have turned into amphibians, have turned into reptiles, have turned into birds and mammals and so on. Big gas clouds turn into big stars, little gas clouds turn into little stars. Sounds logical, except when we examine the laws of science. You see, there's a law of science. I'm going to step back even a step further that says matter and energy can never be created and never be destroyed. Now, there's never been an exception. We've got mathematical theories, we've got stories, we've got ideas, we throw all sorts of postulates at it, but every experiment we have ever done in the history of mankind confirms that matter can't make itself. Now, that's the law of science. You got two possibilities, the box made itself or the box is a box maker. Which direction does the observable laws of science point? I think you see that direction. And then you look at stars. Now we're told stars are constantly remaking themselves. Why are we told that? Well, if the universe really is in the order of 14, 15 billion years old, then stars are a big ball of hydrogen gas. They're constantly burning up their fuel with nuclear fusion to create the heat and the light. And the majority of stars out there aren't big enough that they can be as old as the universe is. So if you want to believe the universe made itself, you're stuck with the conclusion stars have to be continually remaking themselves or they wouldn't all still be out there. Well, can they? Let's look again at the law of science. There's a law of science means there's never been an exception, or it would be downgraded, that says gas always moves from low pressure out to high pressure, okay? Observable, followable, experimentally verifiable. PV equals nRT. As you compress it, the temperature goes up, the molecules bounce harder together, it shoves further apart. The forces are thousands of times greater than gravity, forcing the molecules apart. Now for a star to form, it would be like there is low pressure gas in this room, there's high pressure gas in this can, and the only thing separating the two is the valve. For a star to form, it would be like me opening the valve and all the gas in this room getting compressed and sucked inside of the can all by itself. Remember, it has to do it itself. It has to make itself. So I like to do experiments. It's what I've done all my life. You open the valve and you watch which way does the gas go. It goes from high pressure to low pressure every single time. And stars are spinning. And when you spin something, if you don't restrain it, it is spewed outward. It's called angular momentum. What is restraining spinning clouds of gas in outer space? Nothing. They're in a vacuum. The molecules are even farther apart. The laws of science. See, I've really come to the conclusion God, the box maker, absolutely wants us to know what reality is, what the truth is. And the very laws of science are there to lead us to the correct conclusion. That's why they're there. Now that is different than the operation of what has been created. Nobody sitting here doesn't understand that the universe operates by natural laws. It's what allowed science to be developed. But that's different than understanding the law that shows it couldn't have made itself naturally. That's the compelling evidence that we keep looking at. And we've never seen a new star form. We've looked at, with the Hubble Space Telescope, in every little sector of the sky, there is an estimated 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars out there. That's 10 with 22 zeros. And we've come back 5, 10, 20 years later and take a picture of exactly the same spot. Now, there's not a single unrefuted example. There's been a few misinterpretations where they've seen gas clouds and then lights appear, but the gas cloud was spreading apart and they were seeing stars behind the gas cloud. Never been an astronomy book that says, here's a picture 10 years ago, here's a picture today, here's a new star. We don't see them forming. The laws of science say they can't form. Here's quotes from astrophysicists that are simply, they still believe it's happening, but they're being honest with the data. The origin of stars represents one of the most fundamental unsolved problems of contemporary astrophysics. If stars did not exist, it would be easy to prove We wouldn't expect them to form because of the laws of science. Most of us are persuaded stars form out of diffuse matter, which has to condense and contract. Nevertheless, nearly all observations of these gas clouds, pre-stars they call them, show it's dominated by stuff flowing outward. You see, that isn't some little side issue. That is a black swan. The very laws of science are pointing us in a certain direction. Now, you can ignore the laws of science and still believe the box made itself, but don't say it's not faith. It's enormous amounts of faith. I will hold on to observable science. Geological sciences. The reality of whether or not there has been a world restructuring, resculpturing deluge covering this entire globe is absolutely central to this whole subject. Now, if there has been such a deluge, then it would have had enormous geological implications. So where are you going to find out if it's true or not? You're only going to figure it out by studying the rock layers, studying the strata, studying the fossils, studying the geological layers. You hear all the time, well, we'll talk about, the evidence for creation and creator, but it has to be in a philosophy class. How are you going to come to any conclusion in a philosophy class? You got to go get your hands dirty. You got to go study the rock layers. You got to go look at the data. Do yourselves a favor and look at both viewpoints. And don't just accept what you hear over and over and over and over and over again. The worldwide flood's fantasy. The worldwide flood has never happened. The worldwide flood's been proven wrong. Show me the data that proves it could have never happened or has never happened. And then line it up with the data that indicates it may have. And I'm just going to give you one example. In 2000, a paleontologist from North Carolina University, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, found a Tyrannosaurus rex bone out in Wyoming. She actually said when it was broken and pulled out of the ground, she smelled something that smelled like rotted flesh, obviously dead matter. And she was amazed. She was surprised. What would that be doing there? She got permission to dissolve away part of the bone. Inside the bone, she found all sorts of soft, stretchy, undecayed, essentially fresh tissue. Now, for 100 years, we have been doing scientific studies showing the rate at which organic molecules decays and degrades. And all of those studies, the actual data, would indicate at maximum in laboratory environments, this type of tissue couldn't possibly last more than 30,000 years. And yet every textbook will tell us there hasn't been a dinosaur on this planet for 60 million years. Now, either that's true or it's not. But what's the fresh tissue doing inside of it when their science shows it couldn't? I'm going to show you a little 1-minute video clip of Mary Schweitzer being interviewed by MSNBC. But I want you to listen to her words and realize when she came out with this scientific paper, she still hung on to the time frame because that was reality. That was a fact in her mind. It's everything she's ever been told that led her to believe that has to be true. But, so she's under extreme attack by her colleagues. She's being told it was contamination, it's some sort of bacterial film, it's a misinterpretation, but it can't possibly be dinosaur tissue because everybody knew that's what the laws of science, the observation of science show us. It can't be that. So she's very tentative in her answers, but listen to her words.
Is that amazing to find this kind of soft tissue in a fossil of its old? And what can the soft tissue really tell us?
Do the last one was suggested.
It's utterly shocking, actually, because it flies in the face of everything that we understand about how tissues and cells degrade. It's not something that any one of us could ever predict or hope for. And I think that it's important to remember that we don't know for sure what it still is. It looks like blood vessels, and it looks like bone matrix, and it certainly looks like cells, and it acts like cells. But we haven't done the chemical analysis that let us say what it is for sure.
Professor, word comes to us that the capillary structure or something that you've observed is actually very similar to that of an ostrich. And I'm wondering, does this add fuel to the idea that the dinosaurs and birds were in fact related?
Well, potentially, yes. Realize that the blood vessels in your bone look just exactly the same as well. Vessels at the level that we reported in the paper all kind of look the same. It's the molecular constituents that differ from one animal to another or from animals to humans. So the potential is there to really tell some differences, but for right now, that's not something that we can address.
And one of the exciting things about this discovery, correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that this stuff was fossilized as it was. It's 70 million years old. You don't expect to find soft tissue, do you?
Not at all. No. It was utterly shocking.
So you have to sort of rewrite the book as far as fossilization goes, I assume.
Well, that's the exciting part for me. I've always been very intrigued by how things change in going from a living being to part of the rock record. And like I said, a lot of our science doesn't allow for this. All of the chemistry and all of the molecular breakdown experiments that we've done don't allow for this. So,
Okay, now I just want to leave that ringing in your ears. All of the chemistry, all of the molecular breakdown experiments don't allow for the tissue to be there. I didn't even say those words. That's the woman who studied it all her life. All right? Now, she's went on to show this tissue had to be reptilian. It couldn't have been bacteria. It couldn't have been contamination. Now, because they're past the misconception that it couldn't be there, they've started to look. We found half a dozen examples. A researcher from the University of California set up and ran their microscopy lab, found a Triceratops horn in the summer of 2013, wrote a scientific paper, published in a major scientific online magazine, showed these are osteocytes, bone-building cells, extremely fragile, essentially impossible for them to be there for 60 million years, and yet there they are inside of that bone. He pointed out the implications. He pointed out they couldn't be that old, therefore the rock layers couldn't be that old, therefore misinterpreting the rock layers of the Earth, because we misinterpreted the reality that they are laid down by enormous flood-flowing waters. He was fired from his position because he was showing this to students. At the University of California, stellar ratings for 5 years, set up their laboratories. He pointed out the implications of a research study, and he was removed from his position in the science department. You see how strongly only the box made itself perception is produced and allowed to be shown throughout our universities. Enormous black swan. Now, just because we're keeping this brief, more data to come in the other sessions, one example from the biological sciences. Now, I just picked this because I'm an engineer. It just pumps my, my pump to see this sort of thing. You know, the Earth is filled with absolutely mind-blowing creatures with mind-blowing abilities. Now, one of them just happens to be this little insect called the leafhopper. Now, this guy is like the Olympic athlete jumper on steroids of the animal kingdom. Okay, there's 20,000 species. Now, from our viewpoint, that doesn't mean the box maker made 20,000 different of these critters and all of a sudden they're all over the Earth. He put the genetic information into very different creatures at the moment of creation. Every geneticist knows every single breed of wolf, dog, coyote, fox can be traced back to an original gray wolf. And it's just very sorted and moved into various variations of the dog kind with time and natural selection, which we'll talk about, which is a true force of nature. But could it have turned the dog into a cow? That's the question. So you've got this leafhopper kind of creature, lots of variety, color, beauty, and so on. And he is designed for jumping. The little nymphs, when they take off and they don't have as much mass, and they release and take a hop in order to go from one spot to another, their initial acceleration is 200 Gs. Now, when you drop an object, it accelerates faster and faster at 1 times the force of gravity, 1 G force. A test pilot, when he is banking and chasing another fighter, he will often exceed 10 Gs, but he's in danger of blacking out when the human body hits about 10 Gs. Now, they test these guys in these centrifuges, spinning them around and around. I want to show you what 10 G-forces looks like on the human body. It's a lot of force, okay? This little critter, he takes off at 20 times as much speed and acceleration and force pressing against his body. Now, here's the issue. When he takes off, his little insect brain is moving along, jump, tells it to jump. The signal fires down, hits both legs, but it splits, and it can't necessarily hit both legs absolutely simultaneously. Now, he's moving so fast, if the signal hits one leg before it hits the other leg, guess what? It contracts, he takes off, slams his head at 200 G's into the tree, end of evolutionary advancement. How did he advance? How do you solve this problem? Well, scientists have studied this. It's what we do. It's kind of fun, okay? Turns out, this is what is found at the base of the 2 legs of this insect. A set of perfect intermeshing gears that allow forced simultaneously rotation at high speeds. Now this is a big study to develop new high-speed rotational intermeshing gears. Now how in the world do you produce this by random mutational changes to some pre-leafhopper critter that must have just some sort of a disc in there, or no gears, or no fins, or whatever? How do you do that? Now you can make up a story. Anybody can make up a story, but how do you show this small change? I mean, I work with machine shops all my life. It would be like taking a washer and going in one day and hitting the washer with a hammer. It's going to make a change. It's going to make a permanent change. It's a mutation. But then the next day I come and I hit it again. Third day I hit it again. How many times have I got to hit it to form a perfectly intermeshing gear? And meanwhile, how is the insect surviving when these gears aren't meshing right and it's not being able to jump? See, to us, this is absolutely obvious. There's got to be a designer behind it because mutations in natural selection aren't explaining this sort of thing. This is one example out of a million examples out there in nature. So, and I see that as a black swan. Now, I understand molecular biologists, they're probably not going to buy this, but at least bear with me for the last 2 minutes and then we're going to wrap up. Because I've been asking this question for decades. How can people not see what I think is so absolutely obvious? How can't they see it? We've all read that. You folks who firmly believe evolution is an absolute fact, you look at us and say, how can they not see what's absolutely obvious to me? Well, let me show you this little video clip. It's a clip by a scientist. He's a doctor that made a bunch of science films quite a few years ago. And he's simply going to show you a figure that your brain is going to see exactly what it is. I want you to watch it as we roll through this, and I'm going to draw some conclusions. But first I want to point out what Dr. William James, who is called the father of modern psychology, he spent his entire life studying how does the human brain work. And this is one of the primary conclusions he came to. There is nothing that is too absurd to be believed by other human beings if you simply repeat it often enough. Especially if you exclude from their view any other possibility. Chemicals could come alive. Bacteria could turn into people. And on and on and on. Now, I understand many people don't consider that absurd, but I want you to watch this little video and think about the implications.
The two ends obviously are parallel, but the two sides are not parallel because the two ends are not the same length. This figure we call a trapezoid. Now let's remove the cover. Are you a bit confused? Well, all we've done is cut some holes in the figure and painted it to look like a window frame. But maybe you say, well, you can't fool me, that's still a trapezoid. Well, it's still a trapezoid, all right. But now let's revolve the figure and see what happens. Does the window frame seem to turn, then stop, and reverse directions? Well, such is not the case. It is revolving continuously in a clockwise direction. Now, even when we know this, the illusion still persists, and it looks more like a window all the time. Well, maybe you need a reference point. See if the cube will help you follow the edge of the trapezoid all the way around. Watch closely now. Doesn't help a bit, does it? Not only does the trapezoid still oscillate back and forth, but the cube actually seems to take off and go floating through space. Now, it doesn't, of course. Actually, the cube has been firmly attached to the edge of the figure all the time. Now, an iron bar should make a good solid reference point. Let's see what happens now when we rotate the window. Of course, we know that the revolving window frame cannot possibly bend the iron bar or cause it to cut through the window frame. But this knowledge seems to be of no help at all. The illusion of an oscillating window still continues. From earliest childhood, it has been our experience that windows are rectangles and that all sides are parallel. Your eye sent an accurate image to the brain, the image of a trapezoid painted like a window. But your mind said, ah, that's a window. And rather than give up the idea that all windows are rectangular, your mind accepted all sorts of improbable things. Solid bars bending or cutting through solid matter without even leaving a hole.
All right. Now, this is where I wrap up. Figure out how to turn the lights back on. There we go. If our brains can do that with something as absolutely, totally, solidly apparent as a visual image, and by the way, they showed this to people from Africa who had never seen a square window, and they asked them, what are they looking at? They said, we're seeing a figure going around and around in a circle. Your brains are seeing the right image. They just won't let you interpret it correctly. They said, well, how about when we put the cube there on the edge? They say, we saw it go around and around attached to the figure. The bar, they saw it go around and around. Because they hadn't been conditioned to think in only a certain way. See, the danger of our public education system is that they're guiding students systematically toward only one possible viewpoint, the box made itself. And we are so creative and so intelligent, and the box maker, God, absolutely wants us to have the freedom to accept the truth or reject the truth. He wants us to have that freedom. But when we do so, our minds become conditioned to where they can't even see any other possibility. That's a large part of what's going on around us. And the laws of science are there so we will absolutely know the truth. To a large part, people are being blinded. Incredibly intelligent people are blinded to any other possibility. See, when you teach people only one of two possibilities is true, and you repeat it over and over and over and over and over again, and you don't even let them see the data that contradicts it, they're obviously going to view everything through that possibility. Now, this is what this conference is about. There really is an enormous amount of evidence supporting that the box is a box maker, that life is deteriorating downward. It is not increasing in complexity upward. Especially, the biological lectures, they have example after example of that, supported by papers and scientific research work. Because it's the only place you can find out what is the truth and what isn't the truth. So I hope you enjoy the conference. I believe the Bible really provides that model. Just look up into the model. 10 times at the very beginning it says, creatures reproduce after their own kind. Birds stay birds, trees stay trees, fish stay fish. Very, very specific and very, very clear. That is biology. And it's either true or it's not. So I applaud you for being here to even examine the data. I challenge you to remain skeptical and ask really good questions, but remain open to the possibility that what you believe might be wrong. And thanks again.